Have you ever noticed someone who seems to walk through life without close friendships? Perhaps you've even wondered if you're one of them. In our hyper-connected world, where social media counts followers by the thousands, there's a quiet paradox unfolding. More people than ever report feeling profoundly alone, even surrounded by others. The legendary Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung spent decades exploring the deepest corners of the human psyche, and what he discovered about solitary individuals might surprise you. This isn't about loneliness as pathology or friendship as obligation. Jung's insights reveal something far more profound about the nature of human connection, individuation, and the courage it takes to truly know oneself. Today, we're diving deep into Jung's psychology to understand the truth about people who have no close friends. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at solitude or yourself the same way again. To understand why some people struggle to form close friendships, we must first explore one of Jung's most fundamental concepts, the persona. Jung described the persona as the mask we wear in social situations. It's the version of ourselves we present to the world, carefully constructed to meet social expectations and protect our vulnerable inner core. The word persona comes from the Latin term for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater, and Jung chose this term deliberately. Just as those theatrical masks allowed one actor to play multiple roles, our psychological persona allows us to navigate different social contexts. Now here's where it gets interesting. Jung believed that everyone needs a persona to function in society. It's not inherently problematic to have one. The problem arises when someone becomes completely identified with their persona, losing touch with their authentic self. But there's an opposite problem too, one that's particularly relevant to our discussion today. Some individuals never fully develop a functional persona. They struggle to create that bridge between their inner world and the outer social environment. This isn't about being fake or dishonest. It's about lacking the psychological tools to translate one's authentic self into socially navigable forms. These individuals often feel like aliens in social situations, unable to engage in the subtle dance of social reciprocity that seems to come naturally to others. Jung observed that such people often retreat inward, not out of arrogance or misanthropy, but out of genuine inability to connect through conventional social channels. They feel the gap between their inner experience and what they perceive others expect, and this gap becomes an unbridgeable chasm. But there's another side to this coin. Jung also recognized that some of the most psychologically developed individuals appear socially isolated, not because they lack social skills, but because they've moved beyond the need for superficial connections. They've done the hard work of individuation, that lifelong process of becoming one's true self, and they discover that fewer people can relate to their authentic expression. This creates a fascinating paradox. Those who haven't developed enough and those who've developed beyond conventional social structures can both appear friendless, but for radically different reasons. Jung's work on psychological types revolutionized our understanding of human personality, and at the heart of his typology sits the distinction between introversion and extroversion. This distinction is crucial for understanding the friendless individual. For Jung, these weren't just preferences about where you get your energy. They represented fundamentally different orientations toward life itself. The extrovert's energy flows outward toward objects, people, and external experiences. Their psyche is nourished by engagement with the outer world. The introvert's energy flows inward toward thoughts, feelings, and inner experiences. Their psyche is nourished by reflection and internal processing. Here's what most people miss about Jung's concept of introversion. It's not about shyness or social anxiety. An introvert in Jung's framework is someone whose primary interest and energy investment is in their inner world. They're oriented toward subjective experience rather than objective reality. Jung himself was a profound introvert. He spent long periods in relative isolation, working on his theories, exploring his own psyche, and engaging in what he called active imagination. He maintained only a small circle of close relationships throughout his life, and he was quite comfortable with this arrangement. For the introverted individual, close friendships require an enormous expenditure of energy. It's not that they don't value connection. It's that authentic connection demands they turn their natural orientation outward, which is inherently draining. Small talk, social rituals, and group dynamics can feel like navigating a foreign country where you barely speak the language. Jung recognized that introverts are often misunderstood by the extrovert majority. Society tends to pathologize introversion, treating it as something to be fixed or overcome. This creates an additional burden for introverts. Not only do they struggle with the energy demands of social connection, but they also carry shame about their natural disposition. Many introverts who lack close friends aren't avoiding connection because they're damaged or deficient. They're simply being true to their psychological type. They require solitude to process their experiences, to recharge their psychological batteries, and to engage with the rich inner world that is their natural habitat. However, Jung also warned against the dangers of extreme introversion. When the introvert completely withdraws from the outer world, they risk becoming lost in their subjective reality, unable to test their perceptions against external feedback. This can lead to a kind of psychological imbalance where fantasy overtakes reality. The healthiest introverts, according to Jung, maintain some bridge to the outer world, even if that bridge is narrow and carefully selected. They don't need many friends, but they need some authentic connection to prevent their inner world from becoming an echo chamber of their own projections. Now we enter darker territory, into what Jung called the shadow. This is perhaps his most powerful and unsettling concept, and it holds particular significance for understanding why some people remain friendless. The shadow contains all the aspects of ourselves that we've rejected, denied, or repressed. It's everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, everything that contradicts our ego's self-image. And here's the crucial insight. The shadow doesn't disappear just because we deny it. It operates unconsciously, influencing our behavior in ways we don't recognize. For someone who lacks close friends, the shadow often plays a hidden but decisive role. Let me explain how this works. Imagine someone who consciously desires friendship but unconsciously fears intimacy. Perhaps in their past, vulnerability led to betrayal, abandonment, or humiliation. That pain, if never processed, gets pushed into the shadow. The ego continues to believe it wants connection, but the shadow sabotages every opportunity for genuine closeness. This creates a tragic pattern. The person reaches out, begins to form a connection, but as soon as the relationship approaches genuine intimacy, the shadow activates its defense mechanisms. They become critical, distant, or they create conflict that pushes the other person away. Then they're left wondering why they can never maintain friendships, genuinely confused because their conscious intention was to connect. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his clinical practice. People came to him complaining of loneliness, but as he explored their psyche, he discovered powerful unconscious forces actively preventing the very connection they claimed to want. The shadow can also manifest in projection. We project our disowned qualities onto others, then react to those people as if they actually possess those qualities. Someone who has denied their own neediness might perceive others as clingy and demanding, avoiding friendships because they can't tolerate the neediness they see reflected back at them, which is actually their own disowned need for connection. There's another shadow dynamic at play too. Some individuals have internalized deep shame about their desire for connection. Perhaps they learned early that needing others was weak, that self-sufficiency was the highest virtue. This shame gets pushed into the shadow, and the conscious ego adopts a stance of proud independence. "I don't need anyone," becomes their mantra, but beneath it lurks a desperate longing for connection that can never be satisfied because it can never be acknowledged. Jung's solution to shadow problems was always the same: consciousness. You can't integrate what you won't acknowledge. The path forward requires brutal honesty about the unconscious forces shaping your relational patterns. It requires looking at the ways you might be sabotaging connection, the fears you're avoiding, the pain you're running from. This work is excruciating. It's far easier to blame others, to say the world doesn't understand you, to maintain your story about why friendships don't work out. But Jung insisted that genuine psychological development requires confronting these hidden aspects of ourselves. Let's shift now to what might be Jung's most important contribution to depth psychology, the concept of individuation. This is the process of becoming fully oneself, of integrating all aspects of the psyche into a coherent whole. And here's where the discussion of friendlessness takes a surprising turn. Jung believed that individuation requires periods of profound solitude, not loneliness, but chosen solitude, where one confronts oneself without the distraction of social demands. This is where we do the deep psychological work that transforms us from unconscious beings driven by instinct and social conditioning into conscious individuals living authentically. In many spiritual traditions, this is recognized and honored. Think of Jesus's 40 days in the desert, Buddha's time under the Bodhi tree, or the vision quests of indigenous cultures. These traditions understood that transformation requires withdrawal from the collective. Jung himself underwent what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, following his break with Freud. For several years, he withdrew from much of his social and professional life, diving deep into his own psyche through active imagination, dream analysis, and what would eventually become his work on the collective unconscious. This period of relative isolation was not a breakdown, but a breakthrough, the crucible in which his most important ideas were forged. For individuals on the path of individuation, conventional friendships can feel impossible to maintain. As you change, as you integrate previously unconscious material, as you challenge the collective values you've internalized, you become increasingly different from those around you. The things that once bonded you to others, shared assumptions and values, no longer hold the same weight. This creates a lonely paradox. The more you become yourself, the fewer people can relate to you. You're speaking a language others don't understand because they haven't done the same inner work. Your references point to experiences and insights that exist outside the conventional framework. Jung observed that individuals deep in the individuation process often go through periods where they have no close friends. They've outgrown old relationships, but haven't yet found people who can meet them at their new level of consciousness. This isn't elitism. It's simply the reality that psychological development is rare, and finding others on a similar path is statistically improbable. But here's what's crucial. Jung didn't see this as permanent isolation. He believed that as we individuate, we eventually find others who've done similar work. These relationships, when they occur, have a different quality. They're not based on shared superficialities or collective values, but on mutual recognition between individuated souls. The friendless period, then, can be a necessary stage in psychological development. It's the desert we must cross to reach the promised land of authentic relationship. The mistake is to avoid the journey altogether out of fear of the desert, remaining trapped in superficial connections that never truly satisfy. Jung also emphasized that individuation is not about becoming a perfect, isolated sage. It's about becoming more fully human, which ultimately includes the capacity for genuine relationship. But those relationships must be built on a foundation of self-knowledge, not on the desperate need to escape from ourselves through connection with others. One of Jung's most radical ideas was the collective unconscious, that deep layer of the psyche we all share, containing the archetypal patterns and images that have structured human experience across cultures and throughout history. This concept has profound implications for understanding human connection and its absence. Jung proposed that beneath our personal unconscious lies this collective layer, connecting all of humanity at a fundamental level. We're never truly alone, because we're all participating in the same archetypal dramas, all drawing from the same wellspring of symbolic meaning. The mother, the father, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the anima and animus. These aren't just personal complexes, but universal patterns. This offers a radically different perspective on the friendless individual. From Jung's view, even someone without a single close friend is still connected to humanity through the collective unconscious. They're still participating in the human story, still embodying archetypal patterns, still linked to the species through invisible threads of shared psychological structure. But there's a paradox here too. Access to the collective unconscious often comes through solitude. It's in the absence of personal relationships, in the silence of aloneness, that many people first encounter these deeper layers of psyche. The archetypal images emerge most powerfully in dreams, active imagination, and creative work, all of which require withdrawal from the social world. Some individuals who lack close friends have an unusually strong connection to the collective unconscious. They're oriented more toward these universal patterns than toward personal relationships. They find meaning and connection through engaging with art, mythology, spirituality, and the great questions that have preoccupied humanity across ages. These people might appear isolated, but from their perspective, they're in constant dialogue with something far vaster than any individual friendship could provide. They're communing with the collective soul of humanity, drawing wisdom from the accumulated experience of the species. Jung himself felt this connection deeply. His work with symbols, myths, and archetypes gave him a sense of participating in something that transcended his individual existence. When he studied alchemy, Gnosticism, and Eastern philosophy, he wasn't just doing academic research. He was connecting with the collective human search for meaning. There's a danger here, of course. The collective unconscious can become a retreat from the challenges of personal relationship. It's easier to engage with archetypes than with the messy reality of actual human beings. The person who loses themselves in mythological studies or spiritual pursuits might be avoiding the harder work of intimate human connection. Jung warned against inflation, where the ego identifies with archetypal content from the collective unconscious and loses its grounding in personal reality. When this happens, the individual starts to believe they're special, chosen, or fundamentally different from ordinary humanity. This creates a barrier to friendship because it places them on a pedestal, separate from the common human experience. The healthy relationship to the collective unconscious maintains a balance. You recognize your participation in these universal patterns while remaining grounded in your individual, personal existence. You draw wisdom and meaning from the depths while still engaging with the surface world of human relationship. Let's explore another of Jung's crucial concepts, the transcendent function. This is the psyche's capacity to reconcile opposites, to create a third thing that transcends and unites contradictory positions. Understanding this function is essential to grasping the deeper truth about friendless individuals. The transcendent function emerges most powerfully in solitude. It requires a kind of internal dialogue, where different parts of the psyche are allowed to speak without external interference. For the person engaged in this process, periods without close friends aren't empty. They're full of internal conversation, debate, synthesis, and creative resolution. Jung discovered the transcendent function through his own experience. After his break with Freud, he found himself caught between two contradictory positions: his rational, scientific training and the strange, symbolic material emerging from his unconscious. Neither position alone was adequate. Through patient engagement with both, through allowing them to speak to each other, a third position emerged that united them. This became the foundation for his entire analytical psychology. For individuals without close friends who are engaged with the transcendent function, their inner life is extraordinarily rich. They're constantly mediating between different aspects of themselves, between conscious and unconscious, between thinking and feeling, between their personal experience and collective wisdom. This work produces insights, creativity, and psychological integration. But it's solitary work. You can't do it in committee. The transcendent function requires a kind of internal spaciousness that social demands disrupt. This is why many creative individuals, mystics, and deep thinkers have historically lived in relative isolation. They weren't antisocial. They were engaged in a process that required protected solitude. Jung also recognized that the transcendent function could produce what he called the self, the archetype of wholeness, and the organizing center of the psyche. The self is different from the ego, that limited construct we usually identify as I. The self encompasses the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, and connecting with it requires transcending ego consciousness. For someone oriented toward the self rather than the ego, conventional friendships, based on ego-to-ego interaction, can feel hollow. They're seeking a different kind of connection, one that engages the depths rather than the surface. These are the people who, when they do form friendships, seek others interested in the big questions, the existential mysteries, the exploration of consciousness itself. This isn't about intellectual elitism. It's about psychological orientation. Just as some people are naturally drawn to external achievements, others are drawn to inner development. The latter group often appears friendless because they're playing a different game than most people, seeking different rewards, oriented toward different goals. So, where does all of this leave us? What is the truth about people who have no close friends? Jung's psychology offers a nuanced answer that escapes simple categorization. Some people lack friends because of genuine psychological problems, unintegrated shadow material developmental trauma, extreme imbalances in their type, or pathological narcissism. For these individuals, friendlessness is a symptom of psychological disease that requires attention and healing. But others lack friends for entirely different reasons. They're deep introverts for whom social connection requires enormous energy. They're individuating souls who've outgrown their old social world, but haven't yet found their new tribe. They're individuals engaged with the transcendent function, or connected primarily to the collective unconscious. They're creative, spiritual, or intellectual seekers whose interests lie outside conventional social concerns. Jung would say that the crucial question isn't, do you have close friends, but rather, are you becoming more conscious? Are you integrating your shadow? Are you living authentically? Friendships, like all aspects of outer life, should emerge from inner wholeness, not substitute for it. For those who genuinely desire closer friendships, but struggle to form them, Jung's psychology offers a roadmap. First, explore your shadow. What are you avoiding? What fears are you projecting? What needs are you denying? This requires rigorous self-honesty, and often the help of a skilled therapist or analyst. Second, understand your psychological type. If you're a natural introvert, stop trying to be an extrovert. Honor your need for solitude, while finding ways to bridge to the outer world that respect your energy economy. Quality over quantity in relationships isn't just acceptable, it's optimal for introverts. Third, engage in the individuation process. Do the hard work of becoming yourself. This might require a period of relative isolation, and that's okay. Trust that authentic relationships will emerge from authentic selfhood. Fourth, cultivate your relationship to the collective unconscious. Engage with art, mythology, dreams, and spiritual practices. Develop your creative capacities. This work enriches your inner life and paradoxically makes you more interesting and available for genuine connection. Finally, practice what Jung called active imagination, that dialogue between conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. This develops the transcendent function and creates internal integration. When you're more integrated internally, you're more capable of external relationship. The truth about people who have no close friends, according to Carl Jung, is that there is no single truth. We're each walking our own path toward wholeness, and that path looks different for everyone. For some, it winds through rich social landscapes with many companions. For others, it's a solitary trek through interior wilderness. What matters is consciousness. Are you aware of why you live as you do? Are you making choices based on genuine self-knowledge or on unconscious compulsions? Are you avoiding connection out of fear or embracing solitude as necessary for your development? Jung believed that the goal of life isn't happiness, social success, or even friendship. It's becoming who you truly are, integrating all aspects of your psyche, and living with maximum consciousness. Sometimes that path is shared with others. Sometimes it must be walked alone. If you have no close friends, the question isn't what's wrong with me, but what am I being called to explore in this solitude? What work can I only do alone? What aspects of myself am I discovering that I couldn't encounter in the distraction of constant companionship? And if this period of friendlessness feels painful, know that pain can be the birth canal of transformation. Jung suffered greatly during his confrontation with the unconscious, yet he later called it the most important period of his life. Your isolation might be preparing you for a depth of connection you cannot yet imagine. The psyche has its own wisdom. Sometimes it knows we need to be alone before we can truly be together. Trust the process. Do the work, and remain open to whatever form connection takes when it arrives. Thank you for watching. If this video resonated with you, please like and subscribe. And remember, whether you walk alone or among many, the most important relationship is the one you have with yourself. Make it conscious, make it honest, and make it whole.